Warning, this episode may contain disturbing content, soothing narration, and mild existential dread. Basically, murder ASMR for stressed professionals. Listener discretion is advised. Hell, it might be necessary.
Respect my authority.
No thanks.
If you grew up in the 90s, you probably recognize that as a very poor imitation of South Park's Eric Cartman, demanding respect for authority he had neither earned nor deserved. But authority is a weird thing. Because when we're talking about the authority one person has over another, not legal authority, but personal authority, nobody can simply demand it from us. We give it to them. We submit to it because on some level, we trust them. And I've debated for a while about doing this case. Not because it isn't important or intriguing. I mean, parts of it are downright salacious. Exactly the kind of thing that attracts audiences to true crime podcasts. I hesitated because we're going to have some really hard conversations. Yes, this is a case about arson, and it's a case about murder, but that's not the only facet. Dawn Hacheney was murdered by her husband, Nick, a minister, a man who claimed to speak for God, a man who would eventually be revealed to be anything but what he portrayed himself to be, and importantly, a man people treated as an authority. Why? Well, that's where we're going to dig in. And I accept that some of the things we're going to say over the course of this series might ruffle some feathers. So let me be very clear about something from the beginning. This series is not a criticism of faith. It is a criticism of authority, of conformity, of surrendering your own judgment to another human being, and particularly of allowing another person to become the middleman between you and your faith. We're going to criticize a lot of things, not simply for the sake of criticizing them, and certainly not for the sake of offending anyone, but because there is a word that is going to matter enormously throughout this story. Discernment. Blind faith in God, I can understand that. Blind faith in a man who claims to represent God should raise enough red flags that it starts to look like a carnival moved into town. And don't think for 1 minute that the problems we're about to explore, the things that tore apart a community and ultimately cost a woman her life, are exclusive to faith-based groups, because they're not. Charisma, charm, kindness, authority, and just enough truth sprinkled in to make everything else easier to swallow. We see it in churches, but we also see it in schools and on sports teams and in workplaces. And we see it in cults. In fact, it's part of the blueprint. Find someone vulnerable, give them something they're longing for, make them feel seen, make them feel understood, make them feel like they finally found the people who get them. And then little by little, move the boundaries. Because nobody shows up on day one wearing a weird robe and chanting. They show up as someone you like, someone you can trust, someone who seems to understand you. And if you aren't careful, by the time you realize what's happening, you've been spoon-fed the insanity in such small doses for so long that you're wearing the robe and you don't even remember putting it on. This is a story about murder, about arson, about coercion, manipulation, and the abuse of authority. But more than that, it's a cautionary tale, a reminder that authority should never be confused with infallibility, that someone's position or title does not exempt them from scrutiny, that trust should never require you to surrender your judgment, and that you don't have to check your brain at the door to have faith. This is Pulpit and the Pyre, the murder of Dawn Hacheney on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark, sooty landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer, former firefighter, and I'll be leading the choir for tonight's services.
And I just scramble the eggs and butter the biscuits.
Breakfast was really good. And we have 2 corrections from our Whiskey A Go-Go finale, and these actually came in an email from Mark Bolton, who is the son of Brian the Eagle Bolton, the reporter that was working so closely with Jon Stewart. The journalist who Finch contacted was named Dennis Watt, not Brian Watt, as I said in the last episode. And also Roger Rogerson, he was actually a cop from New South Wales and not Queensland. So I just wanted to correct those two things since Mark was so kind to email me, and he was very complimentary of our coverage, and I really enjoyed his email. And before we get down to business, a big old trigger warning, because even though we open every episode with a content warning, this one is going to get a little extra special attention. This case involves murder and arson, but it also involves sexual coercion and the abuse of power by people in positions of religious authority. And if these topics are triggering for you, we encourage you to take care of your own mental health before indulging in this case with us. If you're hanging with us, we admire your fortitude and we ask that you do us a huge favor. Go into your podcast player of choice and give us a 5-star rating. And on platforms that allow written reviews like Apple Podcasts, those are also incredibly helpful. We're a very small niche podcast in a big ocean of big budgets and people with entire teams. Over here, it's just a girl with a lot of fire expertise, a passion project, a completely dysfunctional sleep schedule, and the best husband in the whole world supporting her.
Oh, the bullshit is strong with this one.
But you can help us grow this platform by leaving us those ratings and reviews. As of scripting this episode, we are still holding steady at 80 ratings on both Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so no new ratings this week. But we did get some comments over on Podbean, so thank you to Just Becky, Kevin Tarrant, and of course, Jeff Luzier. Your alliterative efforts were so greatly appreciated this week and definitely gave us a smile. If you're on social media, so are we. Come follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, and or YouTube. And when you see content from us, help us get it in front of more eyeballs by giving it a like, sharing it, leaving a comment, adding it to your favorites. All of those little things help us find our audience. Crime to Burn will always be free on your favorite podcast platform. We are not in this for the money. It appears we're in it for the ulcers and things to do during nights of insomnia. But should you want to financially support the show, you can join us over on Patreon, where you will get all of your episodes ad-free. And y'all, I have posted the Patreon episode an entire day early for 3 weeks in a row. Will I mess it up this week? Remains to be seen. So suspenseful. But yeah, those ad-free versions get posted the moment that they're done. So when I have my crap together, you get them a wee bit early, and when I don't, well, you still get them without ads. If you'd like to wear a shirt that threatens to talk smack about an arsonist's mama, you can find our unhinged merch designs over on our spread shop. The link is in the show notes. And of course, you're welcome to email me your own personal fire stories, case suggestions, episode feedback, and unbridled outrage at what I'm about to tell you over at crimetoburn@gmail.com. I check that account personally every single day because I can't afford help, so you actually get replies directly from me. Try that with Dateline. No hate to Dateline, I love Dateline. In fact, Dateline's podcast series, Mortal Sin, is one of the sources for this series. And all of my sources will be in the show notes as always. But my primary source is a book called A Twisted Faith by Greg Olson, who actually did participate in the Dateline series Mortal Sin. And y'all, some true crime books are very research heavy and some are very emotional. And this one is honest to God riveting. I could not put it down. If you like true crime books that will keep you up past a reasonable bedtime, this book is absolutely going to do it. Now, because I'm a fire protection engineer, I am going to cover a lot of the same material that appears in both the Dateline series and in Greg's book, but neither of those treatments focuses particularly heavy on the fire science, and I think the science here matters. So if you've heard this story before, worry not, because I'm going to try to bring something new to the table. I do want to be clear about the limits of what I have, though. I do not have the complete investigative file. I don't have the photographs or every piece of physical evidence or all of the court testimony. So I'm not going to pretend I can conduct a complete fire investigation from my desk 30 years later. But I can evaluate what we do know. And I can look at the explanations that were offered for this fire, the physical evidence that has been described, and what we know about fire behavior, and tell you whether those things make sense. And y'all, we're gonna have some things to talk about. So let's get into it, shall we? It was December 26th, 1997, the day after Christmas. Sandy Glass was at home with her family when the phone rang. On the other end was Nick Hacheney, the youth pastor at her church. He was also the pastor Sandy and her husband had turned to for counseling when their marriage began to crumble. But by that point, Nick Hacheney was something else to Sandy, too. He was the man with whom she was having an affair, and Nick had called to tell her something. He said, quote, "I did it." Before Sandy had time to ask what he meant, her call waiting beeped, and she clicked over. On the other line was another parishioner from the church, the woman in charge of the prayer chain that sprung into action whenever someone in the congregation was facing a crisis. And there was a crisis. They all needed to pray for Nick Hacheney because his wife Dawn had been killed in a house fire. Sandy thanked her for the information and clicked back over to Nick. Now she knew that his wife was dead. What she didn't know was what Nick had meant when he'd said, "I did it." So she asked him, and Nick said, "It is done." The strange thing was Sandy wasn't surprised to learn that Dawn Hacheney was dead. As far as Sandy understood it, Dawn's death was the fulfillment of a prophecy. What surprised her was hearing Nick had apparently taken responsibility for making that prophecy come true. Or at least, that's what Sandy Glass would tell a courtroom 5 years later. Nick had not been home when the house he shared with his wife Dawn caught fire. He'd been out duck hunting with family friends. When he returned, fire department vehicles clogged his street, and the unmistakable acrid smell of a house fire still hung in the air. Nick ran toward the house, but someone intercepted him. "You can't go in there. There's a body in the rubble." The body was on the bed in the primary bedroom and was presumed to be Dawn Hacheney. She was still lying on her back in the couple's bed. The fire had burned away her limbs, and her remains were so badly damaged that dental records would be needed to make a positive identification. Nick Hacheney was distraught, or at least that's how everyone at the scene described him, sobbing. The Hacheney's 2 Labrador retrievers had not died in the fire. One of them, Hope, who was pregnant at the time, had gone on the duck hunt with Nick. The other, Faith, had been given to Sandy Glass's son as an early Christmas present.
And he named his dogs Hope and Faith.
And yes, the dogs were named Hope and Faith. Arriving at the scene to comfort Nick was another pastor from Christ Community Church, a man named Robert Biley. And what Biley suggested was wildly unorthodox. Biley told Nick that during their mission trips to Africa, they had successfully used prayer to raise the dead. And he believed that Dawn's death had been an accident, and she wasn't supposed to have died. And he suggested that he and Nick should go and pray over her body, and if it was God's will, God could raise her from the dead. Dawn Hacheney's body at this point had been so badly burned that she had been reduced to little more than a torso. And Nick refused. And to Robert Biley, that was preposterous. There were no guarantees, of course, but what could it hurt? But Robert Biley would not pray over Dawn Hacheney's body that day, because Nick refused. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the Almighty Creator cannot raise someone from the dead, nor am I going to tell you that Robert Biley was lying when he said he'd witnessed this type of miracle himself, because I wasn't there. But discernment cuts both ways, because I don't think there's anything inherently suspicious about a man refusing to stand over the catastrophically burned remains of his wife and attempt to raise her from the dead. Grief does not have a correct response, and shock does not have a correct response. And refusing to participate in something that extraordinary, particularly while you're standing in front of the remains of someone you love, I don't think that's evidence of anything. But to Robert Biley, Nick's refusal was suspicious. And while plenty of people probably would have been unable to hide their incredulous shock at the suggestion that God could or would return a horrifically burned woman to her earthly body, the idea wasn't as far out of left field for members of the Christ Community Church as it might have been for someone who has never experienced a charismatic church. Christ Community Church was an evangelical, fundamentalist, deeply charismatic congregation. So let's talk for a minute about what that meant in this particular church. First, they believed strongly in direct prophecy, in words from God received through supernatural messages and visions. And prophecy wasn't reserved for church leadership. Members were encouraged to engage in it themselves, with the belief that each person had the ability to receive divine words from God. They placed tremendous emphasis on divine will and interpreting their daily events and personal desires and their relationships through the lens of God's sovereign plan. And the church had a very rigid patriarchal structure. Women were expected to be submissive to their husbands and to male church leadership. Women could serve the church in areas like childcare, music, or administrative work, but the leadership of the church itself was reserved for men. Now, I've been to a lot of different kinds of churches. I've tried on a lot of denominations over the course of my own spiritual journey, and I have absolutely attended charismatic churches. So what I'm about to describe is my interpretation of my own experience. Charismatic churches aren't a monolith, and I'm not suggesting every charismatic congregation looks exactly like Christ Community Church. But the charismatic churches that I've experienced were very driven by emotion and feeling. Services might include things like speaking in tongues, very intense music, dancing, and there can be this almost palpable energy in the room, sort of an emotional current running through the service. And for some people, that feeling is interpreted as the presence of God. And I'm not here to tell you whether that's what it is or that's what it isn't. But at Christ Community Church, members were taught to expect God to be active and perceptible in their lives, and that they could receive messages from Him, and they could experience these supernatural events. Things happening around them could all be carrying divine meaning because God was always at work. And if you've never experienced a charismatic church, even if you're a person of faith yourself, it can be very difficult to understand just how powerful that experience can be. Because those emotions can feel very profound to some people. The feelings of being surrounded by people that are all experiencing the same thing you are, and the music and the energy, and this certainty that something larger than yourself is happening right there in the room, it can feel incredibly compelling, and for some people, even intoxicating. And I'm not telling you that's right, and I'm not telling you that's wrong, but I'm telling you because I think it matters as we take apart this case. As we dig deeper into what happened at Christ Community Church, you're going to hear about prophecies and visions and divine instructions, and people making enormous decisions based on what they believed God was telling them. And if we want to understand how that happened, we first have to understand the environment in which those messages were being received. Because to these people, the supernatural wasn't theoretical. It was happening all around them every day. So Robert Biley's suggesting that they see if it was possible to pray Dawn back to life, that was not outside the realm of what many people in this congregation genuinely believed was possible. For some congregations, and probably for plenty of people listening right now, that suggestion is absolutely off the deep end. But as we move through this story, I'm going to ask you to keep an open mind about the people involved and the framework through which they understood the world around them. If you were raised in or later became part of a charismatic church where you were taught that God speaks directly to people, the miracles still happen, and that the supernatural is actively unfolding around you, something that sounds impossible to an outsider may not sound impossible at all. And understanding that distinction is important to understanding this case. So for members of Christ Community Church, Dawn's death carried enormous spiritual significance. Some people believed her death fulfilled a prophecy, and some believed everything, including tragedy, was part of God's will. But there were others who were not so sure. Fortunately, investigators don't investigate fire deaths by trying to determine whether something supernatural happened. Unless maybe you're Fox Mulder. They investigate using science, physical evidence, witness statements, fire behavior. Well, ideally. Because investigators are human too, and humans have feelings, gut feelings. Some people elevate those and call them instincts. Sometimes those instincts can be incredibly valuable when years of experience make something feel off long before an investigator can fully explain why. Other times, those same instincts become tunnel vision, and once we've decided what happened, it's surprisingly easy to interpret every new piece of evidence through that lens. And on December 26, 1997, there didn't seem to be much of a reason to suspect foul play. What investigators saw was a distraught husband weeping openly, a church community rallying around him, a house without a working furnace that relied on portable space heaters for warmth. They found the remnants of Christmas wrapping paper still scattered about the bedroom, recently opened gifts, several small propane cylinders, the kind that were used for camping stoves. And Nick explained that those had been his Christmas presents from Dawn, which he had opened the night before. He planned to use them on camping trips or to heat the yurt that he'd built in their backyard. Dawn's body was still on the bed, lying on her back. The bedroom also contained a space heater. Nick told investigators that he turned it on before leaving for his duck hunting trip so the room would be warm when Dawn woke up. There were wires crisscrossing Dawn's remains, indicating that she had also been sleeping beneath an electric blanket. And none of that by itself immediately suggested any kind of murder or foul play. Investigators would, of course, wait for the medical examiner's findings before drawing firm conclusions, but at first glance, the scene seemed consistent with an accidental fire. But there was one thing that gave them a little pause. Dawn was still lying on her back. That isn't the posture that investigators typically find in fire fatalities. Victims who often awaken during a fire, they move around, they try to escape, they seek cleaner air, they react. So why hadn't Dawn? Had she somehow slept through the fire? Had she been incapacitated before it began? Those were questions only the medical examiner could answer. And at first, the propane cylinders raised questions. Why would they have propane cylinders in the bedroom? But Nick had the explanation ready. They were Christmas gifts from Dawn, and he just opened them the night before. And Nick wondered aloud whether one of them might have leaked and contributed to the fire. Or perhaps a carelessly tossed piece of wrapping paper had drifted too close to the space heater. Both seemed like perfectly reasonable possibilities to investigate. And if Dawn hadn't gotten out of bed, Nick had an explanation for that too. Dawn had been battling a cold, and she'd taken Benadryl before going to bed, and according to Nick, she'd gotten up in the wee morning hours to take more of it. Maybe she'd simply never woken up. With his home destroyed, Nick was suddenly homeless and left with little more than the clothes on his back and his Labrador Retriever, Hope. And he moved in with the senior pastor of Christ Community Church, Bob Smith. Nick wasn't simply an employee at the church, he was practically family to Bob Smith. In fact, Nick and Dawn had spent Christmas Day at the Smiths' home when the duck hunting trip that took Nick away from the house that morning had first been suggested. You see, years earlier, Bob Smith had hired Nick as the church's youth pastor, and the two men had become exceptionally close. Bob did not just see Nick as a colleague or an associate. He and his wife Adele saw Nick like a son. And as Nick sought comfort from his congregation, Dawn's body was taken away for autopsy, where a problem was revealed. Dawn's lungs contained no smoke and no soot, and her blood didn't contain elevated levels of carbon monoxide or the other toxic byproducts of combustion that investigators typically expect to find in someone who remains alive in a burning building. Yet there she was, in the burned remains of her own bedroom. If Dawn had died in the fire, why didn't her body show the signs that she had been exposed to smoke? The toxicology report offered one possible clue. Dawn actually had a very high level of Benadryl in her system. Had she simply taken too much medication while trying to sleep off a Christmas cold? Had she remained unconscious as the fire developed? And if that was the case, why had she not inhaled smoke? That left investigators and medical examiners with a big question. Is it possible for someone to die as the result of a fire without ever inhaling smoke? And the answer is yes. Absolutely it is. Now, typically, it happens during a flash fire. Think explosions or bombings. A sudden fireball that superheats the air. And when the victim has that first inhalation of those intensely hot gases, it can trigger a reflex called laryngospasm. The vocal cords involuntarily slam shut, sealing off the airway, and the victim dies without ever inhaling smoke. It isn't something you normally see in an ordinary house fire. But there was something about this bedroom that made investigators pause, because there were several small propane cylinders, the kind used with camping stoves. Could one of them have leaked, filling the bedroom with flammable gas? Could the space heater have cycled on, producing a tiny electrical arc that ignited the propane air mixture and created a flash fire? If so, that could explain everything. The lack of smoke in Dawn's lungs, the absence of carbon monoxide in her bloodstream. And the Benadryl could help explain how Dawn didn't wake up to the smell of propane filling her bedroom. The medical examiner ultimately concluded that Dawn had died in a propane-fueled flash fire. The intense heat caused laryngospasms, sealing her airway before she could inhale smoke, and the elevated Benadryl wasn't evidence of foul play at all. It was simply the desperate attempt of a woman battling a miserable Christmas cold to try to get a few more hours of sleep. The manner of death? Accident. And every true crime aficionado listening right now is probably yelling at their speaker. What about the life insurance? What about the marriage? What about an affair? Because if you've listened to enough true crime, you know that investigators don't just ask how someone died, they ask who might have benefited, and who had something to gain, and who had a reason to want that person gone. But those questions only matter if there's some indication that all wasn't well. And from everything investigators were hearing, all was well. Dawn and Nick Hacheney had what appeared to be a model marriage. Members of Christ Community Church described them as devoted to one another. Nick wasn't just a husband, he was a minister who counseled other couples through their own marital struggles. Dawn worked outside the home, helping to support the family financially so Nick could continue to serve the church. They were partners, a team, the kind of couple other couples looked up to. If there were cracks in the marriage, no one seemed to know about them. In fact, in one important respect, Nick and Dawn didn't quite fit the mold of Christ Community Church at all. As we talked about earlier, the church embraced a strongly patriarchal view of marriage. Women were all expected to be submissive to their husbands, and they were encouraged to devote themselves to raising children and caring for the home and homeschooling whenever possible. But that wasn't Nick and Dawn. You see, they had no children. And Dawn worked outside the home and was the family's primary breadwinner because both she and Nick believed that God had called Nick into full-time ministry, and her income allowed him to continue serving the church. Ironically, among the couples at Christ Community Church, Nick and Dawn were probably one of the more progressive marriages, and by all outward appearances, it worked. In fact, Dawn was such the responsible one in the relationship that she'd recently been worrying about what would happen to Nick and what she believed was God's calling in his life if something ever happened to her. So, just a few weeks before Christmas, she'd increased her life insurance through work. And this is where the ominous music starts playing. Because if you've listened to enough true crime, the words increased life insurance immediately make every alarm bell in your head start ringing. But let's be fair. Increasing your life insurance doesn't make your spouse a murderer. It makes you responsible, at least most of the time. And the truth is, Nick liked to spend money. He and Dawn were already carrying debt after buying a fixer-upper house and slowly renovating it as they could afford to, and money was tight. But Nick also had a habit of giving money away. If a family at church needed help, he'd often withdraw money from the couple's account to help them regardless of what his own finances looked like. And Dawn seemed perfectly content with that arrangement. After all, Nick never presented it as his generosity, he presented it as God's will. And if there was one thing Dawn possessed in abundance, it was a sincere desire to serve God. Supporting Nick's ministry, supporting families in the church, sacrificing financially so others could be blessed. Those weren't burdens to Dawn. They were part of the life she believed God had called her to. So investigators looked into the life insurance, and almost immediately that potential motive started falling apart. Because yes, Dawn had increased her life insurance through work shortly before Christmas, but the increase didn't take effect until January 1st, and Dawn died on December 26th, which meant Nick could not collect the additional coverage. And if the insurance money was really the motive, well, it would have been an awfully impatient murder. 5 more days and that additional policy would have taken effect. Of course, that assumes Nick knew exactly when the new coverage became effective, so for the moment, the insurance looked less like a motive and more like an unfortunate coincidence. There was homeowners insurance too, but when investigators added everything together, the existing life insurance, the homeowner's policy, and everything else that might eventually pay out, the total was somewhere around $100,000. And that's not nothing, but it's also not life-changing money. It wasn't the kind of payout that would instantly erase years of debt or transform Nick's financial future or leave him living some lavish new lifestyle. And then there was Nick himself. He never really seemed particularly motivated by money. In fact, if anything, he seemed almost indifferent to it. The Hacheneys carried debt while slowly renovating their fixer-upper, yet Nick routinely gave money away to families in the congregation who needed help. Financially, it wasn't always the wisest decision, but Nick seemed to view money as less of something to accumulate than something God had entrusted him to steward. And if the checking account got a little thin, well, he believed God would provide. At least, that was the philosophy he was working from. So while investigators certainly considered the insurance policies, as they should have, they didn't immediately see any sort of overly compelling financial motive. What investigators saw was a grieving pastor, a congregation rallying around him, a marriage that everyone described as loving and devoted, and very little evidence of any sort of compelling financial motive. The accidental fire theory seemed to fit the facts that they had better than any theory involving murder or arson. And then, nothing. No one came forward with any allegations that things weren't what they seemed. No one told investigators about any concerns they had about Nick. No one suggested that he might want out of his marriage or maybe into someone else's. And no one walked into the police station and said, "You need to take another look at this." Oh, people whispered. They whispered in hallways, and they whispered after church, and they whispered to each other. They just didn't whisper to the police. So for 5 years, Dawn Hacheney's death remained an accident, and Nick remained a pastor. And the secrets that would eventually unravel everything remained buried beneath whispered rumors that no one was willing to say out loud to the people who needed to hear them, because things are not always what they seem. Nick Hacheney certainly wasn't. To his congregation, he was a devoted pastor, a loving husband, a grieving widower, a man who had dedicated his life to serving God. But it turns out, Nick was serving a few other masters as well. And that is where we'll pick up next week in part 2 of Pulpit and the Pyre, the murder of Dawn Hacheney. Some days I'm just a little hissy and some days I'm not. Maybe our ears are just different. Maybe our ears are programmed different.
You need to have a sound effect of an eagle screaming in the background. Eagle. I don't think that's how eagles sound, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That sounds more like a terrified me. You had an inkling, did you? When an ink and another ink love each other very much.
They make an inkling? That there are certain topics that you have very well-formed opinions about, and we're going to be touching on some of those today.
I saw you choose those words very carefully. Well-formed.
You have very well-formed opinions about certain things. Do you want to know what we named today's episode? By we, I mean me, myself, and I. And the cat helped because she was in my lap.
I hope we named it George. Man, I have a headache and all my teeth hurt, and I feel like I'm talking funny. Oh, the pulpit and the pyre. I thought you said the pulpit in the pyre.
Mm-mm.
Definitely a career in the I might just switch headphones. I can hear you breathing.
I can always hear me breathing. I actually use a gate expander to reduce my breath sounds. I am a very loud breather. You're like closer to the mic and your audio is louder, but your voice is deeper. And some days your voice is not as deep, but you're further away from the mic. Or, there's like...
Some days I got tighter underwear on than others.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah.
I should name my filters by how tight your underwear is.
You got one for boxers, one for boxer briefs, one for the tighty whities, and then the thong.
And the free balling.
What's free balling? Is that? That's when I'm way down here, baby. Way down the lower range. And my knees are warm. You realize you're like crazy. 8 inches from this thing.
I am not.
Yeah, you are.
I'm 3 fingers.
Well, that's how long 8 inches is.
Wait. So I'm going to need you to participate.
Will I get a participation trophy?
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Always. It's okay, I'll forgive you. And your balls.
My balls do not request your forgiveness. Here I am, Darth Vader, to breathe in the microphone. He's a hacker, not a hatcher.
He's a messed up individual who's now a prison worm farmer.
That sounds pretty normal. What do you mean a prison worm farmer? I didn't realize that you had worm farms at the prison.
So when he entered the prison system, he realized how much food waste there was and decided to take on a program to find a more sustainable way to manage food waste and started a worm farm at the prison. And now the prison has over 6 million worms making fertilizer from the prison's food waste. For some reason, I have such a visceral negative reaction to him that I get offended with myself for agreeing with anything he says. The people demand possum content.
I think you're supposed to say spoiler alert before you tell me he's in prison or something.
Oh, sorry. Spoiler alert. He's in prison. Instead of scaring the possums off, we need to use them for our social media videos.
Next time I yoink one, you record that. Make me wear a hat, though.
Okay.
Make sure I'm wearing a hat. I don't want night baldness coming on.
I don't even know
really
what
shines off that night vision camera.
Oh.
Like cult tourist and Christian anarchist or something like that. No, it's probably too deep for people.
You could say...
I don't think I could pronounce that.
You could say you scrambled your wife's eggs this morning. I have to call my mom today, too.
What are you going to call her? Oh, I hate myself.
Probably mom. Yes, this is a case about arson, and it's a case about murder. But that's not the only surface. Surface? Did I write that? I don't remember writing that.
Facet? Maybe you were thinking facet? Facet's a surface?
And don't think for 1 minute that the problem we're about to explore, the gas that I'm about to expel.
Tiny astronauts are exploring that.
One day I'm going to learn how to breathe so I don't get out of breath. It's not today. Over here, it's just a girl with a lot of fire expertise, a passion project, and a completely dysfunctional sleep schedule. But you can help us grow this platform by leaving...
Am I chopped liver? No. Asshole, man. All the heavy lifting I do to stand here in front of this microphone and drink beer, and I don't get any of that.
Okay.
Damn, I'm offended. Oh.
If you'd like to wear a shirt that threatens to talk smack about an arsonist's mama, you can find our unhinged merch designs over on our spread shop.
I love it when you say mama.
If you would like to wear a shirt that threatens to talk smack about an arsonist's mama.
Oh, mama. Yeah, but you managed to say it funny in a different way every time.
I'm saying it.
That's
exactly
not fair. If you just
way.
said it the same way every time, I'd get used to it. But you gotta switch it up on me, man. You're ducking and weaving.
I'm not trying to say it different.
But you did. You started out mama, and then you ended up mama.
I thought if I said it faster, you wouldn't laugh as much.
It doesn't even say mama on the shirt.
At least it does. It says on your mama, too.
And your mom.
Oh.
Man, you made the shirt.
Try that with Dateline. Wait, that's part of my transition.
Suck your Dateline. Can't even answer your own emails, you lazy bastards.
It's part of my transition to the next part.
Relax. We ain't on a time schedule, really. I mean, every second afternoon you affect me, but it's okay.
You see, Christ Community Church was an evangelical, fundamentalist, deeply charismatic congregation. The doggy's dreaming.
We always get a little dog dreaming here, don't we?
I wish I could breathe like a normal person.
I really trust my propane canisters. I don't know what the fuck you're saying. What do we do with this swizzler? You know, I heard someone say that nobody joins a cult on purpose, but I want to prove them wrong. Join the cult of Steve.
We're not pressuring you to do anything.
I am pressuring you. Feel it? You feel the pressure in your ear hole? Yeah, faith in the snack table, that's all I care about.
I love some snacks.
Go, my children, be blessed, and step not on thine own in the night.
Crime to Burn is a production of Crime to Burn, LLC, where we light fires in your brain and not your buildings. All rights reserved. Still spiritually parched after this episode? It's okay, Steve believes in cross-pollination. Here's a trailer for a show we think deserves to infiltrate your ear holes, in a good way. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review before you go. Steve is watching.
Love a good mystery that leaves you wanting more? Check out my podcast. Hi, I'm Kadra, the host of Perplexity, a Mystery Podcast. I tell tales every single week that have left me perplexed. You'll hear true crime cases, mysterious disappearances, learn about cults, hear baffling sightings of cryptids, chilling paranormal encounters, and even dark and weird history. I release new episodes every Wednesday, and you can listen anywhere podcasts are available. I'm also on Patreon, and you can even watch me on YouTube. Perplexity, a Mystery Podcast. Stories that will leave you perplexed.